Welcome everybody to episode 28 of Ask a Pro. My name is David Donahue and with me is Danny Johnson with the ADU Resource Center. This is going to be a conversation I think everybody's going to really enjoy, and so welcome if you're going to be with us live, and if you're going to be watching it in a recording or listening to it on a podcast, be sure to drop any kind of comments into where you can in the comments section. And also there's going to be some links that you're going to be able to reach out to myself or to Danny at the ADU Resource Center so we can get your questions answered, because that's what we're here. We're here to ask a pro about building an accessory dwelling unit and also best practices. If you got questions, you have a comment, put it into the chat or the Q&A, doesn't matter. I'll see it and we'll be sure to be able to get to that right away. And again, thank you very much, Danny, for being here, taking the time out of your day. I know you guys got a ton of ADU projects underway, and so this is going to be a really great conversation. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, David.
Well, hey, I know we got about 60, 90 minutes. However, if we go over 60, that would be fantastic if we can. Having built my 734 square foot ADU in my backyard, and I'm looking at it right now through my window in my office.
By the way, I heard from Sean. He said it's the nicest ADU he's ever seen. But so kudos to you.
Well, Sean is very nice, and Sean is part of the team over at the ADU Resource Center, and we welcomed him over here to Burbank because you guys are not that far away. We're in Glendale,
not just down the road.
Yeah, you are just a hop, skip, and a throw away from Burbank, and that's easy. So you know it. So yeah, we have a 1 bedroom, 1 bath. I know that you guys do a bunch of things. I know that you were sharing with me that you have several hundred in the pipeline that are going on. So you're going to know the process of building an ADU better than almost anybody in the state of California. So let's kind of start with what I always kind of thought was the easiest, was like, oh, hey, I'm going to build an ADU. Let me just go find one. And that's where I was like, well, holy heck, find one what? A design, a kit build, a prefab, a factory, a tiny. And then it was just like, then I was in it, Danny. And I was like, oh my gosh, where do I turn? And that's what I want to kind of get from your perspective, because we were talking a minute ago, and you have had more conversations with people that are in that particular situation than I have. So I want to kind of, just with people who are here looking to start, how do you usually handle that first conversation of, I want an ADU?
Okay. Well, not that this is a generic formula, but I'll give you some of the more common ones. I'll give you the common ones that I find. And so the typical ADU situation is usually going to start off for a family member like you. And it stays that way until it doesn't, and then it evolves into a potential rental situation where you have mailbox money. But a lot of times it starts off for a family member, a daughter's coming home, mom and dad, or mom or dad need a place to live and so forth. So I think what maybe the obvious thing to start off with is maybe let's identify, excuse me, is it a need item? Or is it a want item? So, I mean, if you're just building a man cave for the sake of having an ADU back there for the guys and watching football, that may be a want item, but it's certainly not a need item. By contrast, if we were to take mom and dad, let's say you've got one of your parents is getting up there in age, and we see this happen, and we're not sure if it's safe for them to live alone. Maybe they don't have all their faculties and they need 24-hour care. Well, assisted living is quite expensive, as you know. I mean, I think I did a study and it was between $5,000 and $7,000 at Leisure World in Seal Beach. So, the kids are going to flip the bill on that. And so if you don't want to have a $5,000 to $7,000 expense, maybe converting the garage into an apartment for mom or dad so that they can have breakfast every morning with the kids, grandkids, until it's their time not to be here anymore. And then we'll figure out what to do with it later, which generally turns into a rental income and is a pretty good supplemental income for retirement. So there's a number of reasons why to do it, but I like to start off as a need item or a want item. And if it's a need item, then we probably should look at timeline and work backwards. So if we know that the typical ADU requires a building permit, we have to get that permission from the city, which requires plans and engineering. So depending upon the city, like LA City, for example, is the fastest because they have a digital portal that we use, but LA County is quite slow. So it could be between 4 and 7 months. That's just to get it through the city, to get the engineering and the plans approved, and your building
That's
permit
with the
to
city or
start
the
them.
county?
Well, it's for both. Both are going to,
Okay.
LA City is pretty fast. It's like 4 months, but, and I don't know if this is a coincidence, but Mayor Bass is committed to getting plans through LA City in 2 months. And it might have been a coincidence, but right as soon as she got elected, we got our first set of plans done in 3 weeks. And I don't know if that was her or her administration, or maybe her or putting the pedal down, but she's committed to going quickly in LA City. LA
How in the
County's
world could they get it done in 3 months? Do you think they added more staff? Do you think that was this a plan that they'd already seen? Did you have the same planner reviewing it?
Dave, I said 3 weeks, 3 weeks, 3 weeks.
Okay, 3 weeks. And how did that
Now
happen?
that's silly, right? That's unheard of. So here's the thing is, I don't know. I don't know if it was a coincidence, but it went through plan check. It got immediately accepted through plan check to the digital portal. And it went through all the municipalities. We went through clearances, and before you know it, it's RTI. We go, you got to be kidding me. So that is how she wants to fast track. Now, I can't say that she touched that project, but it was coincidental because that was her campaign for getting elected as mayor. She says, I'm committed to getting these projects done sooner and faster.
Okay, I think I know how you did it. You have floor plans with their pre-approved ADU program, right?
We have them, but we don't use them. And I'll tell you why, because they are not, the thing about the pre-approved plans is they exist, but they're not necessarily the best design, and they're a little bit expensive. So if you look at some of the pre-approved plans, they have some pretty big vaulted ceilings and some exotic windows and so forth. So LA is going through a beautification process. So they're trying to get the city prettied up on our dime. And if the customer says, I'd like to move a window or add a door or change something, you can do that, but it takes you out of the fast track lane. So you're no longer in the fast track, you're in the slow lane. So you can't edit or modify. And to me, that's silly because we all have to edit and modify. We have to personalize it. There's no floor plan template that we have that's cookie cutter and Legos. Everybody wants to modify it, and they should. So I'm not a big fan of using the pre-approved plans for 2 reasons. Number one, we know we're going to edit it, and that means it negates the fast track. And number two, I don't always agree with the design. Sometimes they're over-engineered and they're going to drive the price too high.
Well, that's one thing, and I've seen with the cities, Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles, their pre-approved plan program. I think one of them I always have fun poking fun at, which is the 16-pointed star, which looks like it would probably cost about $750,000 to build because it has 16 points to it. And each one of those points is opaque. On the one side, it's opaque, meaning that it probably has some clear glass. And I'm like, okay, that is no way you're going to get past the state's Title 24 energy compliance calculations, which is why I, in my opinion, assess a price of $750,000 to it or more. And which is also why I have a great deal of fun poking, I have a great deal of joy poking fun at the Burbank Planning Department, because all that the city of Burbank did was just copy and paste a few floor plans, not all, from LA, and move them over to the city of Burbank. Well, do you know what they included in their pre-approved plan set of the 16-pointed star? And so I've been in front of city council talking to the council members on the dais going, yeah, did this?
Yeah.
And I've been trying to say, how about this 734 square foot 1-1 that's just cute as hell? So anyway, I digress a little bit. You're not happy, that excited about recommending pre-approved plans because they really do not allow for any sort of customization, any sort of really of any change. So you kind of like starting like, okay, what is your want? What is your need? Where are you going to put it? And then let's try to figure out how much the size is. Now, I've seen that that's probably one of the biggest factors is how that's going to affect cost, is how big you're going to want it.
Right. It's subject to the space of the yard, expandability and budget, of course, because, you know, it's at the end of the day, we can load all the rocks on the wagon we need, but we got to be able to find somebody to pull it. And if the project costs too much, and again, going back to the pre-approved plans, some of them are pretty adventurous designs and they're art. You might want to call them art, but they're very expensive art. And I don't know that every customer is willing. They may be able, but they may not be willing to spend that much on an ADU project. So, and if we say, well, I don't get to say how much it costs because some architect designed it for me, and then all of a sudden, if I want to make modifications, I can't do it. Now the whole purpose of the pre-approved plans is to fast track, right? But everybody says, can I add this? Can I add that? No, you cannot, because if you do, it now has to go back to engineering, which throws it out of the fast lane. So we've seen them. We've had a lot of consultations, both video and in person, and we've not been able to be successful with any pre-approved plan as a cookie cutter. Let's go with it. Let's run with it. It just doesn't work. So we find ourselves sort of freestyling and customizing it based on the characteristics of the property, which is the right way to do it.
And and it's something I was listening to it, and I pay a lot of attention to state policy, city policy about doing fast track. And with what you just said, that your most recent experience for city of Los Angeles is you got it through in about 3 weeks. One, your team probably knows what to give for the city. They know what to expect. And I think that's a big one. So if you're listening to this, or if you're here with us live, that I want to kind of focus on the fact that working with a company like ADU Resource Center, that their designers know what the city wants is critical. Not coming from out of the area, and they know what they need. It's not like a state need, which is a prescriptive kind of design, which I have familiarization with. This is what the city of LA wants. And so you have the best opportunity to be able to kind of get it through the planning department as easily and as quickly as possible. My comment about that, and as it pertains to pre-approved, because pre-approved was to kind of cut down from maybe 4 months, 5 months, 6 months to get it down to maybe 30 days or less.
Yeah.
So the necessity of a pre-approved is kind of dwindling if you can get it through planning as quickly as anywhere close to 3 weeks.
Right. You know, the thing that you were talking about is the customers don't know enough. I don't know that most clients know enough to select from a pre-approved plan, quite honestly, Dave. So they're going to need a guide. They're going to need to slow the process down. The whole purpose of a fast track is maybe for a seasoned ADU builder that's done a project or two, and we know who they are. But for most people, they're going to be building their very first one, and they have 1,000 questions because they don't want to make a mistake. I don't know that fast tracking it is what they want anyway. I think what they need is to slow it down, put it in the first gear, and we have to teach them a little bit about, you know, what are the options, what are the good choices. And again, who is it for? You know, because if it's going to be for your dad, why are you building a 2-story ADU over the garage where you got this guy's 85 years old? You're going to make him climb the stairs from a grocery store, for God's sake. So we got to use our sensibilities about it. And you'd be surprised how often we hear them say, oh, you know, I hadn't thought about that. That's a good point. And then all of a sudden the project takes a detour in the right direction. So that's part of our white glove concierge process. Our company is an architectural design and a licensed contractor, so we do both. So what we offer is, if people know what they're doing, I can help you. We can help you. If you don't know what you're doing, we can really help you, because now we have a concierge service where we say, look, if you have a vision, an idea in your head, and you just want to run it up against us, is this going to work? Well, I don't know. Let's take a look at your property. Let's get on a video call. Let's look at Google Earth. Let's look down at the property. And I have something that I'll show you how we get started with people when we're ready. And it generally starts with a conversation. But what I like to do, Dave, is I like to have that conversation on a video call. So while I'm looking at their property on Google Earth, you know, we got this saying, measure twice, cut once. So we always want to make sure that we're double checking our own work. But I want to share my screen with them. So I want to say, look, do you see what I see? Let's determine what will actually fit. So the purpose of the video call is feasibility. We're going to check, is it feasible what you want to do? Is it what you think you want to do? And let's find out if it'll fit. Then what are the implications of that by doing so? Did we alter the flow of the backyard property in such a way that now we've created a mess with the main house? How can we create a privacy barrier so that both dwellings can coexist without having a Hatfield and McCoy thing over there? And then finally, we talk a little bit about the budget. Let's find a scope of work. Let's define the project, and let's kind of run some numbers, and let's just see, is this in your wheelhouse? Is this something that you're comfortable with? And sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. If it's not, then we edit, we modify, and there's a number of ways that we can manage the project costs by either shrinking the square footage, or maybe show them different tiers on finishes. So what we do is we generally build in 3 tiers: basic, middle of the road, and Beverly Hills. And by default, we're middle of the road. I'll never go basic or Beverly Hills unless the client specifically says, Dan, bring me down. I got to get my costs down. So then we'll show them some flooring options, some kitchen options that could control pricing. If, on the other hand, they're in a highline neighborhood and they go, Dan, this can't look like a Home Depot shed. This has got to be worthy of our neighborhood. And I said, okay. So, but by default, we'll always start in the middle so that we're always in that safety neutral zone. But yeah, it starts with a video call typically, so we can kind of check the scope of work against the property of what's available.
So if you're talking to somebody who has a nice flat piece of property, easy to go, somewhat of a simple sort of an evaluation. What happens if you see somebody in like LA, like we're working with somebody who needed a slope band analysis survey? And that was very interesting because the contractor that we brought on board, even though it was all laid out, they missed where a block wall was indicated on the survey, which had actually encroached into the client's property. So what the GC did is he measured from the property line, and it was very interesting how they did this, but they put the ADU like 2 feet away from the block wall. So that it was very interesting to see the encroachment, where I'm looking at this thing going, okay, we all assumed that the block wall was the property line, but it's not. That's how the mistake was made. But the people that dug the footing dug it just where it wasn't with the actual property line, which meant it was going to be where the neighbor had encroached upon them. And so the person who was building ADU did not want to fight or argue with the person who had encroached by having them demolish what was in effect a retaining wall, because the property kind of sloped down, and this is where the retaining wall was right there. And it probably had about 2 to 3 feet of dirt that it was holding back. So the contractor actually had to go in, pull up the footings where they had just been dug, and only metals were in, no concrete was poured, just the metals were done, and had to move it over. So slope band analysis, I think, is something that I think is interesting. And that's what you're going to be able to look at when you're doing this analysis. You're going to say, hey, you're in the hillsides. You have a whole additional level of intricacies and nuances that are going to affect how we're going to get an ADU built and permitted.
Right. Los Angeles is an interesting city, but I think it's one of our favorite cities because the home values are high, and the main houses are generally quite small in relationship to the size of the lot. So the lot has expandable room, which is always good for them and for us. And ironically, the houses appraised through the moon because their proximity towards, being the metro area that everybody wants to be at, work at, or live in or something. So generally, the clients have all the equity in the world they need to fund any kind of project of any sort. Occasionally, we'll see the Hollywood Hills, for example. There's going to be a challenge there of where the placement is going to go. So regardless of how much room they have, we have to find usable room. So the choices are going to be different, but I would say that the sloped property projects that we work on are really less than 5% of traditional. And I kind of look at those as special needs because they're the obvious thing that we have to decide on is, do we excavate the land and make it perfectly flat to put an ADU on? Now, in doing so, I have to have the responsibility. We have to have a retainer wall fore and aft. And so what that's doing is it's eliminating erosion from the hillside coming and falling into the ADU. And it's also preventing the ADU from surfing down the hill into the main house. So we have to have retaining walls, one in front, one in rear, and they're quite big and they can be quite costly. If we have that, if it's a mild slope, we can probably do that with a little bobcat, providing we get the bobcat has accessibility to get back. Now, if we have a severely sloped, I don't think it's cost effective to change the soil. I think it's probably better to go in caisson pilings. And we've seen this in Malibu Canyon homes and so forth. That's those little pylons that go down into the bedrock. And then we create the flat surface that we need on top, not even disrupting the soil. Kind of expensive. They're about $7,000 each, and usually you need about 10 of them, depending upon how big your project is going to be. So already we know that that's going to be an expensive project just to build on something flat. So I tell customers that have a hillside home, are you sure you're willing to spend the money to do this? It's a perfect location. You're going to have a bird's eye view of the skyline and everything, and it's going to be worth a lot of money one day, but it's going to take a little bit of money to get it started. So 50% of the time they go, I had no idea, scratch that idea, and let's look somewhere on the flat part of the ground, and then we can maybe do an attached ADU off the back of the main house, which is a big solution saver for us. If we can't, if we are going to do a detached ADU in the back, for example, and we have a setback of buildings within 6 feet or 10 feet, sometimes we don't have a room to build what they want to build, but if we can do an attached, meaning that they don't have to connect and go through, they just have to share a common wall. Well, I don't have a setback at all. And so now maybe I can build that on the flat ground and take off a couple of zeros off the price tag for them.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because I understand exactly what you said 100%. But for those people who are not used to what setbacks are, so let's kind of say, because typically within the state of California, if you're doing a detached ADU, meaning that it's not a garage and it's not part of that main house, and you want it to be standalone, you typically are going to have a 4-foot setback from property lines. If you have a property line that has power lines above it, like we did on ours, we had what's called a prescriptive easement, which meant that we had to go, instead of 4 feet away from the property line, we had to go 5 feet. So we just added 1 foot. And having sort of conceptualized it, done some videos on it, and actually having now seen it, 5 feet's actually not bad. We had the room to be able to do it. But talk about when you do attached and not having to have a setback.
Okay. Can I show you an example?
I would appreciate it. That'd be great. Please do.
So I'm gonna show you more than the question you asked me, but it's somewhat relevant. It ties into what I was talking about earlier when we do an initial video call with a client when we're trying to determine the scope of work. So let me see if I can find the correct one, and I'll pull it up, and let's see video. I think I'm ready there. Let's just, okay. Let me know if you can see my screen.
You're good to go. We can see it.
Okay. All right, so I created this so that people can understand what is the best way to get started. And so for us, the easiest way to get started is just get on the phone and talk. But I think maybe what I'd like to do is talk with you while I'm looking at your property. So these are the things that we're going to talk about. I want to find out, is it feasible? Is it possible to do what you want to do? Options, what can I build? What with the property characteristics that I have? And is there any way for you to tell me what it might look like in advance? So yeah, we can do all of those things. So first thing we do is we pick out your property and we identify what it is. And we simply just go to Google Earth and say, okay, here's your property. Great. Let's take it from a bird's eye view and look above. So when I'm looking above, so one of the things, there's two split visions. So here's the sidewalk on the left-hand side. And as you can see, we walk down the driveway, there's a detached garage. So I kind of see there's at least five different options. I can do a detached garage. I can do a garage expansion for a larger ADU. I can do a detached ADU with the property. I can do an attached ADU, or maybe even a second story over the garage. So let's just kind of quickly run through the different options and see what they may look like. Now, this, granted, when I made this, Dave, I kid you not, I went from Google Earth and I zoomed in, and the very first house I found is the one I use, and this is it. I didn't pick, I just zoomed in, and this is it, because it'll work on any property. So the first thing we identify is, okay, you've got a garage. It's an 18 by 18 square foot garage, so we know it's 360 square foot. We know that we can take that and we can convert it into an ADU. We can certainly do that and make a nice studio concept floor plan. Probably going to look something like that. And the neat thing about the studios, it's four corners. All I need is a kitchen, a bathroom, a bedroom, and a living room, and then we can decide where the flow and the entrance is going to be. But we can probably pretty well figure out where it might look like. If we put it side by side in relationship to this garage, that's what it might look like. So walking down the driveway, you can walk in and see what the possibilities look. So that would be option number one. And so what else can we do? Is there anything else we can do to this project to add value to the property? And I'd say, well, yeah, there's a couple of different floor plan options that could work. And that's sort of what it might look like inside when it's all finished. You know, it looks like a house. It is certainly not a Home Depot shed.
Yeah.
All right.
We do not encourage Home Depot or tough sheds.
Right. Now, here's a little secret that I like to recommend to people. If you can create exterior living somehow, some way to the rear or the side of the ADU, it's expandable square footage. So let's say we have 360 square feet of interior space, but if I have a patio that might be another 250 square feet, well, you know what? We're getting real close to 600 total square feet, which translates into more rental capability for the homeowner without spending a lot. All we might want to do is put up a little fence and create a privacy barrier. So I always advocate, if you have the room, create a little courtyard, just a place for people to have hot coffee in the morning or maybe cocktails in the evening. Okay.
Right.
If we want separation, put up a privacy barrier. There's little vinyl fences. They can work real good. So you can see the possibilities, and they could be decorative. They don't have to look stark. You can put shrubs and things around them to really personalize it and liven it up. If you wanted to grow a living hedge rather than a fenced hedge, you can do that as well. So that was one possibility. If you said, okay, what if I wanted to do a one bedroom and I wanted to have more than 360 square foot? So all I'd have to do is expand it out a little bit, and I could just bring that wall out and now I can create 500 square feet. So everything else can stay the same. I can still make my courtyard. I can fence it off, have the privacy barrier. It's just, instead of a little garage, it's a one bedroom now. So you can see that with one bedrooms now, we've privatized the bedroom. Okay. So the bed is no longer exposed.
Let's take a second, because you covered something that I always like to kind of point out to people that are doing garage conversions that are detached. So on the previous slide where you are showing the expansion, which is kind of going into the garage, going into the yard, you are maintaining that garage's footprint, because it looks like it is right on that property line, which you want to be able to keep that. You don't want to have to pull it back, because if you demoed that garage, you'd have to now be at least 4 feet off that property line. This garage is going to be grandfathered, and by just expanding it into the backyard, you don't have to do any for additional setbacks.
Right, exactly right. And it looks kind of funny because we petitioned, if we were going to demo it, we would actually leave that wall on the property line standing, and it's literally propped up by 2x4s. So the building inspector can come out there and say, okay, I see where your starting point is. You're good to go. You can begin. And then we let it fall, and then we rebuild the wall entirely. But yeah, that was a good point. So,
no, but I like the flow that you're doing with this, and this is what you're going to be doing with a client who says, okay, Danny, where do I start? You're talking to maybe one of the other team members at ADU Resource, and they're going to say, hey, let's do this. We're going to get you on Google. We're going to go through this, and here's how you can envision it. And I think that that's a really great, because you're going very slow, very methodical, but you're also getting them excited by what the potential is.
Yeah, they have to see the possibilities. We have to show them too small, too big, and then we find out what's just right. Some of it's budget driven, of course, but a lot of it has to do with what their need is for. Who is it going to be for? And I didn't even mention we have a whole new pattern happening right now. We have people that are thinking they're going to build a 2-bedroom, 800 square foot ADU out back for renters. And then as the construction is going up, they're looking at it and go, wait a second, why are we going to let renters live in this brand new thing? Why aren't we living in there? Let's rent our front house out instead. And
okay, hold on 1 second, because I have to comment on that. Because it is almost exactly what we said when we were done with ours.
It's funny because people think they're going to build a little old ADU out back and then they'll put a renter in there, but they have no idea how custom beautiful this thing. And when it's going up, they're going to go, shoot, this is nicer than our house. Why are we renting this? Why aren't we living in this? This is brand new. Now, ironically, they decide to flip and they move into the ADU, and the front house can sometimes rent for more than the ADU would. So if you have a family that's empty nesters and all the kids are gone, they're moved out, and it's just mom and dad, sure, you could be perfectly happy inside a brand new ADU and rent the front house out,
right?
Most of which will rent between $3,000 and $4,000. So it's a win-win for everybody.
Well, you're in Southern California, and if you, like you said, if you owned your house, your primary house, more than a minute, you have equity.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I didn't appreciate, until this whole thing started, is that our house in Burbank is a small, just around 900 square feet. It was built in the 1930s. Lockheed Martin was doing a lot of work for the military, and it was built without insulation inside the walls. The exterior walls, Danny, have no insulation. And we only found that out recently when we were doing some window work. So not only that, but with the fact that we have a raised foundation, our ADU in the back is a concrete slab with massive footings. And now with the whole house fan, which is a heat exchanger, the heating, ventilation, and cooling is a ducted mini split. None of the fans and the heating and cooling make no noise.
Wow.
The thing that we get the most noise from is our Instahot in the sink, when it kind of gurgles like it's keeping everything to temperature. Yeah. And that, when my wife and I look at each other with my father-in-law going, that thing's kind of noisy. And I'm like, well, try living in our house for a day, because everything's noisy here. So yes, I completely agree that we are envious, and I can say we're envious of my father-in-law, Chuck, because as you might imagine, my wife kind of went overboard designing it for him.
Well, it's still yours, Dave. It's still yours. And one day it'll be yours again. But I mean, right now it's doing its job and it's making it nice and comfortable. So I'm sure you're happy about that. But
we are excited. We are definitely excited about that. But I digressed. I want to focus on this really fantastic and beautiful looking design, where you've now kind of extended it from what it was, the 300 and change, to now 500, and you've been able to kind of separate a bedroom.
Right. And so we started this because you asked me to demonstrate attached, and I'm getting there. I just have to take the long road to get there. So as we are getting our third example on this property we're looking at. So if a customer says, I want to investigate detached, I want to keep my garage, I need it for parking, I've got my stuff in there. So I've got this big lawn area out there. What can I build with it? Well, okay, so do you want to go big? Do you want to go small? Because we can touch. So if the customer said, what if I wanted to maybe use the garage and go beyond the garage? You can expand it bigger than the $500 or 500 square foot example. In this case, it's 1,200 square foot, which is the maximum size. But as you can see, it's an L-shaped floor plan. So one of the things that I like about L shapes is that inside elbow has a courtyard opportunity. So it has a built-in opportunity to make something pretty cool out of it. So I like to do that. So if we were going to accommodate the garage, for example, now I don't have the setbacks where they're supposed to be. I'm just trying to do a cursory example of the possibilities so people can visualize it. But we still have our patio, we still have our courtyard, we have a private entrance. There's an example of what the floor plan could potentially look like. So all of our floor plans we make in 3D, so you can kind of help visualize all the doors, windows, and everything's to be determined. So washers and dryers, all that stuff is customizable. So there's a number of different things. This is kind of an example of what an interior of an L-shaped floor plan might look like. And as you can see, it looks very, very residential. It's not a tiny anything. It's very, very expansive. And we use full-size appliances whenever possible. We try to make as big a windows as we can. We're very mindful of the solar path of the sun on east and west side windows. So we try to keep the larger windows on north and south facing so that it doesn't mess up our energy calculations, but we love that natural lighting. So we're going to put it in, and white is timeless. As you can tell, it never goes out of style. And surprisingly, we have quite a number of people that still want tub and shower combos, so we can still do that in one bathroom and maybe a shower enclosure in the other. But so detached. If they said, I want it standalone, I want to keep the garage, this is what I was going to go earlier. So you can see I have a certain amount of feet I have to stay away from the garage. That's called a setback, a building setback. And a certain amount of feet I have to stay away from the main house. That's a building setback. And then the property line has typically a 4 to 5 foot setback. So in this particular property, I can fit 800 square feet as a detached standalone if they said, I don't want you to touch my garage, but I like all that other stuff you did. Is there any way we can incorporate that other stuff? Well, sure. There's a bunch of different things that we can do. So we can commandeer the patio area behind the garage. We can maintain the privacy barrier that we had so that the main house still functions and has its own yard. The ADU client has their outside space. So, I mean, this is essentially 800 square foot interior living and almost 600 square foot outside. So that's massive. That's all translatable into dollars and cents when you're renting it out.
Well, this is, I think, something that I think a lot of people don't visualize, which this graphic is very helpful, is you're seeing where that yellow line is, where that privacy fence, or they could do some sort of a living privacy fence, as you mentioned, with shrubbery. But then you now have sort of envisioned, shared with them, you go through the gate, you have this huge, massive outdoor patio area, and then you also have a huge ADU at 800 square feet, because this is pretty significant.
So imagine we have put a string of outside patio party lights, some nice patio furniture. So you have a tranquility corner, or you have a entertainment patio back there. It just depends. So, and again, we use the characteristics of the property. Whatever the property offers, that's what we try to shine the light on. And let's try to figure out the best use for all of the property so that we have a maintenance-free yard and so forth. This is an example of what that floor plan might look like. So if we had a 2-bedroom.
So this is 800 square feet that we're looking at right now.
It is, yeah. So there's 2 ways you can do 2 bedrooms. You can put them side by side. I like to separate them for privacy. Anybody on their telephone, on their iPhone is quite noisy because you can hear them between walls. So putting the common area in between is a great idea. And if you notice, we left that section above at the top with the window and the 2 plants. We left that deliberately open because that could be a slider door going out to the patio. That could be a washer and dryer enclosure right there. It could be a number of different things. So there's a whole bunch of things waiting to happen. In this example, we put a freestanding dinette table, which you don't need that if you were doing a island, but this freestanding table could also go over here into a formal dining room area, or delete it completely and just go with the countertop up here with the cabinets on this side and the seating area. So you have choices. There's a number of things that you can do. And again, this is only 800 square feet, but this is a very, very popular floor plan.
No, it looks fantastic.
This is an example of what it looks like. This is one that we did in Los Angeles. And in this example, they vaulted the ceiling. So you can see it has a pretty interesting look. The neat thing about, custom build is that we can customize tile. They pick out the tile, the building materials, we'll show them samples, and they can pick whatever they like and make whatever they like. And it's just endless of what they can do.
Well, let's talk about that endless and pick whatever they like, because I don't know about your other clients, but I got to tell you, that was completely an overwhelming process when when they said, okay, tell us what tile you want. And we went, we have no freaking idea. And because we knew we didn't want to go pick something out of a Home Depot or Lowe's sort of decor book. And we wanted to be a little bit more unique, but we really were struggling with it. So do you have interior designers? Do you work with interior designers, or do you already have palettes that you've put together that you say, hey, here's things that you can recommend and you can see? How do you wrestle with that?
All of the above, and then we give the clients homework assignments. So their homework assignment is to maintain a Pinterest folder. So what we encourage people to do is go surfing on the internet and start clicking on images that captures their eyes. It doesn't mean that that's what we're going to duplicate. It means I want to know what you like. I want to see the finishes that grab you. So if you're looking at images of kitchens or bathrooms or so forth, save it, put on your little computer a little folder that says ADU, and then within that folder, make subfolders: kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, living room. Every time you see a cool image on the internet, copy and paste it, save it into the folder, and send it to me, and then let me look at it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to get a pretty good read on what we think you like. Now, when it's time to start selecting finishes, I don't want to waste your time with things that I know you don't like. So what we're going to start looking at is we're going to evaluate what you showed us in those pictures. And we're going to say, okay, got some ideas for you. And we will figure it out together. And at some point in time, we'll establish a project budget. And if you take the rooms, they all have allowances. So everything has a cost for shopping. So we'll say your project cost is X. So that means on this particular room, you can go out, pick out flooring that is X amount of dollars per square foot. Now, does it mean you fall in love with something that's more than that? No, it's okay. It's your budget. You can do whatever you want to do. We've even had clients ask us, say, Dan, we know we want to do a little bit nicer kitchen, but the bathroom doesn't need to be that fancy. Could we maybe minimize the bathroom budget and take that savings and apply it towards the kitchen? Of course you can, no problem. You can even exceed the budget. We won't, but you can. So the homeowners have to go out and see things, what appeals to them. Now, I just have a sort of a theory on this. I think that they should pick out the kitchen countertops and the cabinets first. Here's why. If you go out and pick out the flooring first, and then you add a kitchen counter that or cabinets that don't work. Let's say you're not going to go with white cabinets. You're going to go with something that's got color or grain or some texture to it.
Okay, I want to interject, because now you've gone into the world of interior design, and so I know how much I paid for my interior designer, Danny.
Mm-hmm.
Is this all part of the ADU Resource Center, which is included? Does it have this So
Yes.
this conversation of and advice and consulting, get a Pinterest together file, save things under, the various rooms, send them to you. You're evaluating, saying this is our allowances, whether it's entry, mid, or high grade, so that you're having that line item kind of budgeted in so that they can see it. And you're actually going to be kind of walking through them with them to say, here's how you do it and the best way to make, and that's where I kind of interrupted. Don't go by the flooring, go by the counter, and then kind of let everything kind of evolve or kind of take shape around that.
Well, the reason why we know this is because we did it wrong a couple of times, and you only have to do it wrong a couple of times and you'll never repeat it again. So we learned the hard way: pick out the cabinets first, then the flooring. And the cabinets should complement the tiling in the kitchen or the backsplash or whatever, and the countertops and so forth. And you work sort of from the top down to from the ceiling down to the floor. So if you start up at eye level, those are the things that we're going to look at and notice first. If you think about it, we notice the floor last, because it's the last thing you look at, where our eyes are drawn to something higher. So yeah, we spent a lot of time picking out the coolest looking floor you ever seen, and we couldn't figure out why it clashed with the cabinets when we were trying to match it up. We go, this is hard. It's not hard. We did them in the wrong order. So we learned, and so what we do is we say, okay, if you don't learn from history, you're going to repeat it. So let's fast track you. Let's show you the tricks that we do. So you can imagine, with 350 plus projects in Southern California, the first ones weren't easy, but they're easier now because I think repetition is a good teacher. And I think what we learn is we get a rhythm and a pattern. And so now the more projects that we do, we figure out ways to streamline so that we don't have to reinvent the process every single time.
And you, like you said, you're helping them with that level of degree of kind of interior design consulting, but that if they wanted to kind of bring in an interior designer to say, hey, we want to go these different directions, you're happy to work with that too, because
we love it. Yeah, we love it because we're not interior designers, they are. And so they have a much better knack for it than we do, but we're not complete dummies either. So we have a little bit of an opinion simply because of repetition, because we've done it so many times and we have so many projects that every single project we do, we learn new stuff, new things. And now we can say, okay, let's check that box. We know that that works and this one doesn't. So we have shortcuts, we have tips, we certainly do. But if they have a designer that's going to help them work on their theme, we love it. We're happy to talk with them.
I think that's great. And thank you for that question, allowing me to ask that question.
Yeah. Did I ever get to your attached question?
Nope, you have not yet.
All right. So let's continue on and go past this. I think we were doing detached. So if you recall, let me just back up and remind you, doing detached, if I'm mindful of the setbacks, we had a whole 800 square foot to work with, correct?
Mm-hmm.
If a customer says, Dan, I was kind of hoping for a little bit more, is there anything we can do? Yes. If you're willing to let these structures touch somewhere, they don't have to connect, but if they just touch, let's look at what attached might look like, because that generally we eliminate setbacks and we can use a little bit more square footage. So I picked up another 100 square foot here by touching the main house. Didn't connect them. There's no hallways. They just share a common wall. But you can see what happens is now all of a sudden I've got a little bit more room. Is this a big deal? It is for some people. It is. So they go, look, I can certainly use the 900 square feet better than the 800 square feet. But now, how in the world are we going to divide the property and have privacy, and how, everybody's going to be coming through the driveway? No, not necessarily. There's tricks that we can do. We can create new entrances for you and use the property wisely. So in this case, we use the entrance on the opposite, the unused side of the property. So we'll put stepping stones and rock down over there. They'll have a privacy entrance gate. They'll come in from this side, and we still have the privacy barrier, so we've lost nothing. And the patio area on the garage side of the detached garage, now that's usable space for the main house. So everybody has a place somewhere. There's an example of what that floor plan might look like. So everything is possible. We just want to look at it and just say, can you visualize it? So the whole thing for us on the presentation here is we want to help them visualize the possibilities, because if they can visualize it, then we know what to do. And the idea is, show us the bullseye. We can hit it, but fumbling around in the dark is tough. So
Right.
the last one is the detached garage. So if we said, okay, so what if they said, well, we're just thinking about a little apartment over the top. So we know that there's that detached garage, and there's my interpretation of an ADU on top of the garage. I think I was drinking scotch when I was doing that. So it may not be to scale or perspective, but I think we get the idea. We're going to use the top of that, and then basically we're going to take the garage and build an ADU on top of it. Now, in doing so, there's some things that we have to do. We have to reinforce the garage, and there's a technique called underpinning. We have to create new footings and reinforce the walls with 4x4s to support the eventual weight of the second story. And it's not to say that we don't do them, because we do. So you can certainly maintain the lower level garage and then put an ADU on top. It's just, can you visualize it? So what we like to do is we like to start with a video call and just say, look, let's see what we see. We don't know what we're going to see.
Right.
So we'll discover it together.
And I think that's a really good idea, because you've now taken them through, a lot of different options that they have for doing an ADU that way. And then, so when you get them to through that point and they start to say, hey, I'm on a budget, or I don't know what the prices are, but I've seen something online, and I just don't know how the ADU Resource Center is going to stack up against an architect who's going to charge me at minimum $30,000 to design something, because there's wonderful architects out there that's what's on their website right now.
Yeah.
And then they have to incorporate the general contractor and all of those things. So how, let's say you're talking to me, I've seen all those things, and I'm like, Danny, I'm ready to go forward with that detached ADU. I love the idea. I want to keep the space in my garage because I have my old vintage car there, but I need my detached because my dad wants to have his own privacy, his own autonomy.
Well, the first order of business, we check off the feasibility box. Is it feasible? Yeah. According to this example, it was. It's doable.
Mhm.
Is it affordable? I don't know. So next order of business is let's talk about a potential budget. Once we're done with the budget, then we'll figure out what comes next. So a lot of customers ask about pricing, and I think you and I were talking before we started the webinar that, you know, I don't know that they don't know any better. So they're going to go, what is your price per square foot? And so that's one way of talking about a project, but it doesn't necessarily address the complexities of the property. So I think one of the things that we should maybe look at is the budget. And so I have another thing to share with you that which will help explain that. So let me just pull that up and let me know when you can see.
No, I can see it. And I think that before we kind of dive into this, you know, I'm pretty active on social media, and there's a few Facebook pages where I think that a lot of folks get very confused with this. So I think it's great that you're actually kind of addressing it. You're saying, here's a presentation on it, and here's how to kind of get a really good perspective on.
Well, as you can tell, I'm joking about it with the memes here in the PDF because we're poking fun and having fun, but we're not poking fun at them. We just want to maybe help them with some glossary terms so that they can ask questions what they're really looking for is they're trying to say, I wonder if I can afford this. That's really what they're asking. So when they say, what's your price per square foot? I don't know if it's a literal question. It's they're hoping, I hope I can afford what you just showed me because I like it, but
Right.
tell me the bad news so I can get scared or start celebrating. So I think what we should maybe do is let's make it look at a couple of glossary terms. The price per square foot is one way of looking at construction, but the scope of work actually dictates what the project cost should be. And so I'll give you an example. If we said square foot alone, and I'm building a 400 square foot ADU, that means all of these examples are 400 square foot. Therefore, they all cost the same, correct? But
Sure.
that's impossible. So you've got an attached garage on the upper left-hand corner. You got a 400 square foot detached garage. We've got a 400 square foot over the garage, and then we got a hillside 400 square foot detached. So clearly these cost different prices for different reasons. And so I think the scope of work is going to determine what the actual budget is. So let's just kind of dive in. If it was just simply 400 square foot alone, all right, here's two 400 square foot ADUs. Does that mean that this project, they cost the same? No, it's not by virtue. In this case, it's the finishes. So the finishes have a little something to do with the project cost, not just the square footage. So driving our point home, these are 34 different examples of what could affect the project cost, not just the square footage. So there's a whole bunch of things in here: foundation related issues, boundary issues, setbacks, city ordinance approvals, structural engineering design. You know, what's involved to build a two-story versus a single story. And what about that hillside home? We know that that's a little pricey, right? So things like that. So I'll leave the list up for a second while I talk, but there's at least 34 things that I know there's probably 50 or 60 more things that affect the scope of work, not just the square footage. So driving
I
our
will
point.
share with you on this 17, and I don't want to pull it up on to do a screen share while you have this up, because I think people need to take a look at it. But when folks are really trying to dive into it, I know that they understand a little bit about construction. I share with them my 300 line item Excel spreadsheet, 300. And that is about as comprehensive as an Excel spreadsheet as I've been able to put together. And it will immediately take somebody to OMG.
Yeah.
I can't. And so this is just a high level. It is taking into some major points of what it takes to be able to do this. Before I let you finish what your thought was going to be, we did have a question from somebody when you said talking about attached ADUs. The question was not totally connecting the dots when you say attached but not touching, share a common wall, ? So are you framing attached or as a freestanding structure?
The definition of attached is sharing a common wall. They don't need to connect. In other words, they can have a door connecting the main house to the ADU, but it can't be a hallway. Okay, it's not, they're not connected. They're just simply touching, sharing a common wall. So the reason why, if they are 1 inch away, they have to be 6 to 10 feet away by virtue of the city ordinance, building setback. If they touch or they connect or share the same wall, there is no setback. So I'm allowed to use that gap or that setback area that would normally be wasted space. If that makes sense.
That makes very good sense. And thank you for that explanation. I'm going to pull a commercial out of what you just said.
Okay.
That was great. Also, the same person says, I saw a picture of AVAVA, Avava. Do you represent them? And I don't know what that is.
AVA, is that the
AVAVA.
acronym for handicap?
I don't know.
Okay, I thought it was ADA, not AVA. If it's
Well, it would be if it's, but I think it's mentioning a company. But if the person who asked that question could put it into the Q&A or the chat to kind of give it a little bit further explanation, Danny and I would appreciate it. But okay, take us back to the 17 points that you have here.
Okay, so I think the only thing we're trying to do is say, look, there's a little bit more than just square footage. I know that they don't know what questions they asked. It's okay. We're not mad at you, but I want to help you ask good questions because at the end of the day, you're going to want to know, can I get it done to my expectations at a price that I can say yes to and be okay with? And that's really what they're asking for. They're not asking what our general rule or building formula is. They're wanting to know is if you build it the way I think I want it built, will I be able to afford this thing? And so I think that sometimes they can and sometimes they can't. That's the truthful answer. Sometimes they can't. So what do we do when it exceeds their comfort zone? We roll it back. We trim it. We start, changing the aspect ratio if we have to by reducing the square footage. You can't change the integrity or the structural integrity of the unit. The city inspector is going to make sure it's done one way, the right way, right? So they are your eyes and ears, and that's your chaperone, your shepherd, if you will, to make sure that the shell gets built. But what we see with our eyes on the inside are the finished materials. So those things could vary. I mean, they could be basic, pretty much basic, what you'd see. We've all been over our friends' houses and we go, okay, all right. And then we go to a different couple's house. We go, good Lord, look at this place. It looks like a museum. This is fabulous. Well, clearly one costs more than the other. So can we manage the budget by maybe not making it look like a national museum? Sure. So there's tricks and ways we can do that. Just by the flooring alone, the middle of the road flooring is the vinyl plank flooring because it looks like hardwood. It acts like hardwood. It doesn't cost like hardwood. You don't have to stain it or finish it like hardwood, and it's pet proof. So if you want to do a little money saver and you think you want to do hardwood floor, maybe you don't. And what about the people that says, look, even that, can I bring that down? Yes, they have rolled vinyl linoleum that's photographed that looks like vinyl planks. And I've seen it and that fooled me. And I go, wow, I thought this was real vinyl plank. No, it's rolled linoleum. So rolled linoleum is half the cost of vinyl planks. Vinyl planks are half the cost of hardwood floor. So there's a number of things that we can do. I don't know that I would go too terribly cheap on the countertops and kitchens, but there are other things that we can do to help manage costs that are realistic. Sometimes if it gets unrealistic, then we're forced to reduce the square footage to make it work, because at the end of the day, if it's built and if it's underwhelming, then we didn't do our job right. Just because we hit the budget, but if you like it, but you don't love it, we didn't do our job. So we're going to try to find a way to exceed your expectations and make recommendations that are sensible that you'll accept.
And I think I want to take a little bit of a pause here to kind of illustrate the fact that the attention to the scope of work, which is what Danny mentioned earlier, I think is very important. A lot of companies are just they're not going to spend that much time on it. And I've talked to them, not on these webinars, but I've talked to them offline, or you see and you have conversations with people, and they're really expecting you, the homeowner, to do everything. They're not going to be helping you kind of guide you through it, which, as you mentioned earlier, is that more that white glove concierge. And I can't tell you how critical I think that is. I mean, I've been in the business forever, and when we did ours, I lost count of how many times I was overwhelmed because I was kind of carrying this thing forward. There's a lot of decisions to be made. I had, my obligations for work and trying to build this on the timeline. So it's important to be mindful of, as you're going forward with your ADU project, talk to a few people and get an understanding what their company culture is. And I think that that's also important to keep in mind. Before we kind of jump back on track, it's been wonderful. We got a couple of questions from people. And so Jose is asking this one: is there any new legislation that allows for converting accessory dwelling units into single family dwellings? So making an ADU into, let's say, a primary. Well, I think that you might be able to do that if you wanted to through an SB9 conversion. If current legislation, because you now can have two primaries, which is going to be two single family dwellings. It's not going to be termed accessory if you were to identify it as part of SB9. When, Jose, you would do that, I think is important to kind of keep in mind. The other part is that, let's see, and constructing two SFDs on a single lot, you can do that through SB9 as well, too. So it doesn't have the same square footage value. Yes, and so to your last question, it's unfortunate, despite investing in a new ADU, it doesn't have the same square foot value as the main house. And so, Danny, we've seen that because typically an appraiser is going to give it 30%, even though it's built to twice or three times the construction level, right?
So far, here's the thing. Remember, if we look back at this, when did legislation start for ADUs? 2020, right? So this is still relatively new. And so, again, I use this phrase, we don't know what we don't know. And a lot of the cities are learning. There's a lot of cities that have not done an SB9 lot split. They don't know the procedures. So, and there's a lot of appraisers that are just learning. They're not sure the grading criteria on ADUs. There's no history, there's no template, and there's no model to copy yet. So they're sort of pioneering it and doing their best initial conservative guess at 30 cents on the dollar. Is it likely those things will be changing as knowledge and gets shared out there? Yes, of course. So here's the thing. I think if we look at what it costs to build versus first off, it's 1/3 the cost to build than it is to buy. If you go out and try to buy a house, a 2-bedroom house, 800 square foot in your neighborhood, have at it. Go right ahead. You need a monstrous down payment. And you might even get in a bidding war, but it's literally 1/3 the cost to build it. At some point in time, the appraisers are going to catch up with the industry and things will normalize. But if you don't build it, you'll never have that luxury of finding out. So if you need to build it, you should build it because of the return on investment is immediate. But I think the appraised assessments are going to get much better as knowledge is shared out there. Right now, everybody's sort of kind of in a shell, and I don't think cities are sharing much. And if you think about it, I mean, it's 2023, midway through 2023. That's only 2.5 years that this idea of legalized ADUs, accessory dwelling, they used to call them granny flats, and casitas. Now they have an official table of contents, and they're required to have their own address. So I think as affordable housing solutions are on the forefront of legislation, You know, they're throwing a lot of money at this thing, as you know, well know, David, with the $40,000 ADU grants and so forth. That is rolled out again for 2023. So there's so many things going forward that are supporting affordable housing and ADUs in particular. It's not surprising that initially the appraisers are somewhat stumped. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to put a value on it. But it's a temporary thing. I think as we get in our momentum and our stride, things are going to, people who are on the very ground floor of building their ADU, they're going to be quite pleased.
I would agree with that because I would add, Jose, to what Danny said. And both, my company and his company, we are members of the Casita Coalition, which is a statewide organization that kind of advocates and shares with the state legislature and the federal government what sort of things were kind of coming in, as far as impasses or hurdles or things that are making it more difficult. If you're going to do a construction loan, you need to do some sort of, you need to borrow money. And if the appraiser is not looking at the future value based on the square footage, it's really hurting you as a homeowner to borrow that money. The number one thing that funds ADU construction is cash. Second is a home equity line of credit. But people just had to have cash are the number one people that are using it. And the state and the federal government are looking at as a barrier. And they want to be able to pull that barrier down, Jose. So be patient with that one. Also, before we move on to Lisa's question, I want to kind of add, Jose, that currently being legislated is the ability to not do an SB9 lot split where you can separate out and have two different APN numbers. But currently there's something where you could build an ADU and then have it be sold as a condominium. And so that's going to be something where if mom or dad wanted to build an ADU for the kids, but the kids need to pay for it, that is something that I think is going to get a lot of attention, might be able to happen. Lisa asks, I've heard that if you build over a garage in the city of LA, the property line side has to have a 4-foot setback. Is that correct? So I believe it's like, okay, if here's your the wall of the garage and it's right on the property line, if you go above it, do you have to set it back?
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
That is my understanding as well too, Lisa. You do have to set it back. And is also, does every ADU have to have a separate address and utility? I know the answer, but I'm going to let Danny answer it.
That's part of the criteria list that, with the legislation. There's an application that's automatic. It's automatically going to have an address. I don't know that I've heard a condition where somebody wouldn't want that. Have you, Dave?
I haven't. And to Lisa, what I've seen it from is from the fire department and the police department. If you have a separate kind of dwelling and someone says like ours is 902, my father-in-law's is 904. One of the things that they have for the permitting is you clearly have to have labeled where one is. So like we have a big 904 on a gate. So we have the addresses on the curb, we have them on our primary house, and then we actually have it on our gate that goes back to his front entrance. So that's what the local jurisdictions are going to want to be able to kind of take a look at. So thank you for that question, Lisa. I really do appreciate it. John,
David, let me add something to that because it sort of ties in with Jose's question earlier. So let's say for whatever reason, we had a client that says, I really don't want a separate address. I don't want a separate address, but I want to build a detached ADU out back. Okay, great. Well, if it didn't have its own address and down the road you were afforded the ability to do a lot split, how could you possibly identify that second parcel back there, which is ultimately going to be changed? The classification will be changed from an ADU to a main house. That's how it's done, Jose, if you were asking earlier. Now, the criteria is the lot sizes have to be 2,400 square foot each, and the minimum size ADU you build has got to be 800 square feet, but it's possible. So I think it's in everyone's interest. If you're going to go to the trouble of building an ADU, you probably do want an address so it can identify itself independently from the main house, because you just never know. Things could change down the road. You might think a lot split is a good idea.
And thank you for that. I think that's a really good idea. And I think that's the part of it I think a lot of people don't necessarily see. Just so everybody knows, I did put in Danny's email address, my email address, as well as the ADU University address there too. We do have a couple more. Let's see. Carlos, some legislation is working on making ADUs just like condos. It's not passed yet. That is correct. Thank you. We just touched on that. Let's see. John, legislation started in 2017. SB 1069 was first bill enacted. Thank you. Yes, it was a few years ago that they started working on it. I think once everything got approved and really started streamlining is what Danny was saying just a couple of years ago. Let's see. How do you qualify? So Lisa asked the 40. All right, Danny, you opened the door on the $40,000 grant.
I regretted it the minute I said it. All right, so let's talk about it. So in 2022, there was a $100 million rollout from the state of California. California Housing Financing Agency, CalHFA, sponsored the grant, and there's a number of admin companies facilitating the grant in California, HPP Cares being one of them. So they went through, if you take $100 million and you divide that by $40,000, that's 2,500 grants. So they went through that rapidly, and we only just recently heard that they are going to roll out, or they did roll out, another $50 million for 2023. Now, before you get excited, there's a 9,500 person waiting list and growing. And if you take $50 million,
how big? This is the first time I've heard how big the waiting list is.
It's 9,500 people left over from 2022.
And are you on the HPP Cares list as a preferred provider? Okay, so folks, number one thing I can recommend is if you are looking for an ADU and you are remotely interested in anything that Danny has talked about, do not pass go. Contact ADU Resource Center and say, I want an ADU and I want to see if I'm eligible for the ADU grant. Easiest, quickest way to be able to get access to that is by working with a preferred provider, which is what the HPP Cares does provide. So I just wanted to kind of take a quick moment.
Yeah, it's a rat race. It is, because everybody's jockeying. Now, there are some things that are, I guess we could say, are positive, and some of the people that were on the list, they pooped out. They gave up. They said, okay, I don't know if it's going to happen. And some of which did not qualify. You know, one of it's financial assistance. So the criteria is you have to make under $180,000 as an individual in Los Angeles County and under $235,000 in LA or Orange County and San Diego County. So there is a income qualifier, which some of the people did not qualify. And so they fell off the list. So if you take 50 million and you divide it by 40,000, it's 1,250, and there's 9,500 people on the list. So you can do the math and figure we're going to have a problem. So take your time, but hurry, because I don't know when it's going to be said. When the dust settles, if you don't have your application in with an admin company like HPP Cares, it's going to be a rough go. We're waiting for the next year, probably.
I think that's a really good insight. Now, Lisa also asked another question, which I skipped over, and I apologize, Lisa. Property taxes. How do you property tax? Have you seen that? Have you been able to have enough data that you could answer, what your property tax typical, homeowner, what they see after they've completed their ADU?
Initially, they don't have an assessment, so they go off the construction value. So the construction value, they take 1.25%. And so what they're going to do is they're going to grandfather the main house and leave it alone. So you're only going to be reassessed on the improvements. So if you're building a $300,000 project, you can multiply that by 1.25%. Initially, in the beginning, that's how they're going to factor it. Now, the good news is if our rookie appraisers don't know how to appraise this thing, you're probably in good shape for a while, because until they figure it out, then they realize it's worth $900,000. You're probably going to be paying a lower assessment tax. So it can work for us, it can work against us, but eventually they'll figure out the formula. But it's not a bank breaker at all.
Yeah, and I wouldn't use that as something that would prevent you from building the ADU. I know the people, that's a very common question, so that's a good question, but it is being able to kind of budget as you are going to be able to kind of see what your costs or how your costs are going to increase going forward. I think it's important. For us, and I'm just sharing my own personal experience, we factored that into what we were going to charge my father-in-law. And all we're charging him is what our costs are. So we're not charging the $3,800 a month that we could rent that thing out for in the city of Burbank. We're charging him a few $100s for the renter's insurance, for the property taxes, and a few other things, just very minimal. And he was happy to pay that because he's like, what do I owe? Very proud Armenian, OG, 87 years old. I got to pay my share and you're not paying it for me. And so we're very fortunate again, because Chuck does not need any assisted living. As Danny mentioned, Leisure World, you're affordable, under $10,000 if you could do that for a month. Typically for assisted living, you're 8,000 to 12,000. So for children or the family of somebody who needs it, building an ADU is the number one thing you can and should do. Biggest mistake that I always share with people is if you think about building an ADU and don't. So be patient, take your time, talk to folks, get on, get recommendations. And I think that it's something that's really, really important. So one of the things that I know that we haven't really touched on is, what is the best advice for somebody? I know that we've done this. We've been talking a little bit about the process of attached, detached, second story, and we've been answering some questions, and thank you everybody for the questions. Keep them coming. But what is just some advice? I mean, you have a ton of experience in this, probably one of the most in the state of California, which means in the country. And so now you're sitting here going, okay, what could I do to tell somebody who's thinking, but hasn't really said, I'm going to? They're just like, looks like a good idea. How do I really start from a very far back, 30,000 conceptual to looking at options? And oh, by the way, I've been really intrigued by these tiny homes.
Mm-hmm.
How do you start?
All right. So it's funny that you should bring up tiny homes. Don't let me get on a rant and then all of a sudden forget to bring up tiny homes, because we have a pretty neat little surprise coming that I think we're going to be launching soon. Getting started, again, it goes back to want or need. Is it a want item? I mean, do I just need a man cave to watch football? Does my wife need a she shed? I don't know that those are need items. Those are cool things to have. And if you want it, great. But if you need something, so for example, we had I'll tell you a couple of quick stories. Had a couple where the daughter got a divorce and she doesn't want to go out and get an apartment because they have to split up as a couple. So they want to come back home, but mom converted her daughter's bedroom into a sewing room. She doesn't want to give it up. And just ironically, the daughter does not want to be coming through the front door at 29 years old. And mom goes, hey, you're out a little late, weren't you? So she needs her independence. So it made sense to take the garage, which, let's be honest, if we look in our garages respectively, 25% of what's in there is important. The other 75%, we don't know where to put it, so we throw it in the garage. All of which could be put into a trash can or the Goodwill. And then what's left, the 25% of important stuff, can go into a storage shed. So that's what they do. They decide, okay, let's put her into a garage conversion ADU. Let's have a garage sale, and then everything else goes to the trash or Goodwill or Salvation Army, and then it goes into a storage shed off to the side of the yard. Now the garage is clean. So we make a little studio, and is their daughter going to live there indefinitely? No, it's temporary. It's a landing spot. So it's a road more than a destiny, but she needs it. So let's build it. So it's a good idea. So they spend what they need to spend to make the garage ADU. Now the daughter can come and go as she pleases through their own private entrance. There's never been that many family dinners like this. Now she's back. But at the end of the night, when dad wants to watch his programs and she's had enough family time, they go home, and they go home to their respective place. And it's like that until she says, Mom, Dad, I met this guy. We're getting married. I'm moving out. All right, now you have that garage ADU that could become something else. And it could be either guest quarters, pool cabana, or more than likely, it could be $2,000 a month mailbox money if you thought ahead. Okay, and we can all use that. So I would say that let's think pragmatically. Is it a need item? Is it a want item? If it's a want item, then there's no rush. But if it's a need item, what we really need to do is let's work backwards. So let's figure it's going to take 6-7 months for planning and permits. And you probably got 4 months of construction, maybe 5. So let's just call it a year. So imagine we're thinking about it in August of 2023. Okay, so this time next year, we'll be popping champagne and doing the reveal and moving somebody in there. That's how you need to look at it. And so if you say, well, shoot, I need it sooner than that, that's a need item. So we probably need to jump on a video call sooner than later. If it's for your wife and it's her she shed, well, we'll get to it when we get to it. That's not time sensitive, but a need item is generally time sensitive. So you want to figure out, if we imagined it would be done a year from now, is that perfect or is it too late? If it's too late, then we need to be talking quicker and get on a video call and start analyzing the property, checking some boxes for feasibility, affordability, scope of work, all that good stuff, and then take our place in line with the city. In that order, that's what needs to happen.
And then just to understand that there's only so much you can do to really expedite, something that's going to be conforming to the California Building Code and Title 24. There's only so much you can do.
Well, listen, it's even more critical than that. And I would say, if I was going to give somebody some 50-cent advice, there's things that you can negotiate price on. Plans and engineering are not one of them. I get calls daily where people say, can you take over my project? I've been stuck in city planning for 2 years. And the short answer is no, I can't, because the architect on record with the city has to forfeit the project. And how many of them do you guess want to forfeit their project? 0. So I can't approach them and help them because I may be in litigation for interfering with their business. So I have to say, I'm so sorry, you have to work out something with your existing contractor. Let me guess, you chased a low number and you got it, and now here's where you're at. Right. That is not where you want to go cut corners, is on plans and permits.
Yeah, and I think that probably some of the most depressing and kind of worrisome phone calls that I've been on, Danny, is that person who said that they were in contract with somebody who said that they could build their ADU for a price, and that they're already facing a $40,000 cost overrun, and they don't have the money for that.
Yeah.
And that's an unfortunate thing where that contractor really did, I think, a bait and switch. They knew exactly what they were doing. The homeowner was very new to it, trusting, oh my gosh, I found somebody that's going to be a good price. And they went into it with a lot of hope and kind of trust in that person, but they took advantage of them. And I think that that's really unfortunate.
Dave,
It's
there is that side, but can I tell you something? Sometimes customers are equally to blame too, because they play the victim when they were being greedy, because when they were told the numbers up front that are real, they conveniently plugged their ears and shopped it until they were told the number they liked better. Okay,
Right.
So sometimes it's the client's fault because you selectively play naive. What you're really doing is you're being greedy, because you're not buying a car. It's subjective. So it's something handmade. And if I said, Dave, you draw a picture of the Mona Lisa, I'm going to draw the picture of the Mona Lisa, I guarantee you they're going to look different. They're not going to look the same. And if you tell somebody, I want to build an ADU, what should it cost? You're going to get a bunch of different numbers, but it's subjective based on their interpretation of what they think it's going to be done right. If you plug your ears to sensibility and say, I'm going to keep shopping until I hear a lower number, you'll get it.
Yeah.
But you can't guarantee you're going to like it.
I want to cover one thing that you mentioned that it triggered something in my head about taking over plans and the fact and why you don't do it. But then I also want to go to tiny homes, because we're getting close to as much time as I said I wanted to take of yours, because you and I could talk about this for hours and hours, because it would be great to kind of have a conversation who's in somebody within the business and is really dealing with customers on a daily basis. And that's the liability, going back to the plans, the liability of a designer, engineer, architect with their plans. They're not going to sell them. They've already drawn them. They've submitted them, their names on them, their stamps on them. And there is some liability with that. And so you're not just going to take it over. And so your comment was, if I understood you correctly, you're not going to go take over a plan mid-job. You're going to have to start over to put your stamp on it, because of the legal liability and responsibility you have within the state of California to build it to code.
Not only that, Dave, I can't do it until the architect forfeits. They have to bow out. I can't be near it.
Right. And so that's the part, folks, where I don't want to spend too much time on this because I want to let Danny talk about tiny homes or what he was ever going to talk about it, because you just have to understand that there are things that when we say we can't do it for this reason, you just have to believe that everybody's acting in the best interest of the project, the homeowner, and of themselves. So with that, let's see, the last 4 minutes are yours.
Tiny homes. So the tiny homes, as we all know, the difference between manufactured homes and tiny homes are wheels. So they're transportable. So I love them. I think they're cool. There's there's TV shows on tiny homes. There's festivals. There's tiny home shows. There's all this other stuff. And so we've had a lot of people saying, look, I can't afford to build a custom home. Can you get me a tiny home? So we've been approached by, I don't know how many manufacturers that said, look, we'll white label something for you. You can put your logo on it. You can do this and do that. And we've just basically put them off. But quite honestly, that price tier under $100,000 is a head scratcher because we're unable to build a custom home under $100,000, quite honestly. And so the key with tiny homes is they have to be 400 square feet or smaller because they got to be transportable on the highway. So the challenge was, okay, let's say I can find a company that will build one under that price where we can have a product and offer people, what the heck is this thing going to look like? It's going to look terrible. And they have. Kind of. So we found a company that we're in discussion with, and I think we finally figured this puzzle out. We've made some design suggestions to them, which they're very ambitious about, and they want to talk. So I actually have a 4:00 video meeting with them today. So it could be that in 2024 we have a major announcement. It'll be pretty cool.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
So I'm a big anti-tiny home without a very clear disclaimer that it is not for continual habitation if it is built to the RV or the ANSI codes. So, and because a lot of people want to have this sub $100,000 product because it doesn't have to be, there's a lot of permitting that's not required. You don't have to have it on a permanent foundation. And I've actually been talking to somebody who says, well, a tiny home on a permanent foundation then is qualified as a habitable unit. And it's not. Because the code that governs how that structure is built is going to be the one that is going to be the most, that's going to be the one that you're going to be answerable to. And when I say answerable to, if you were to rent out a structure to somebody 365 days out of the year, continuously, somebody's living in it continuously, not an RV, meaning a little bit of the time, they're living in it continuously, and there's something that happens. And you as the homeowner, who are the housing provider, the landlord, knowingly bought an RV for non-continuous habitation, what is the liability? And that's always been my question. What is the liability? And as I'm also a manufactured home dealer, we sell factory built manufactured homes. And I went to the factory in Corona, Silvercrest, probably one of the best in the state, and clearly labeled on the countertop was not for continuous habitation, right there. So I think that's not, and I know that you guys are going to be able to do an exceptional job. And if you decide to make a announcement in that realm, I know that you're going to be able to do an exceptional job and probably one of the best jobs in the state. And so I'm looking forward to whatever it is you decide to do, because I think there is a huge need, because if you talk about the missing middle, you talk about people being able to afford in the housing and the state wanting to build housing. My complaint has been to the Casita Coalition. It has been to city planning. Anybody to listen to me is like, okay, folks, your Title 24 requirements on an ADU that's below 500 square feet is ridiculously bad. You should not have energy efficiency that says that I need to have solar panels, and that, my windows can only be so big. It's like, the HVAC systems are so efficient these days on something 500 or smaller. It really is negligible. It's very negligible. So why add that layer of cost to building that ADU if it's 500 square feet or smaller? I'd also argue that if it is an ADU, have some considerations to not make it so hyper energy efficient. Look closer to the HUD codes that are much more relaxed. With the manufactured or factory built housing, if it's coming out to the HUD code, it doesn't have to have solar panels. And so one of the things, and I was just doing this conversation this morning I was going over a bid with a client, and they're like, well, why doesn't this one have solar on it? I said, well, this is a HUD code. Go, well, why does this other bid, which is being a stick built or is being built to California building code, have solar? And that costs like $20,000. I'm like, well, that's the difference between the two codes. And so I apologize for being in this rabbit hole, but I know that I'm going to be able to let you go on tiny homes, but I want to welcome you back, or anybody from your team. If you're going to be doing an announcement, I'd love to follow up with it, because again, I respect what you and Sean and your entire team is doing for the state of California. You're doing an exceptional job providing ADUs to people, and I applaud the work of your company.
Thank you, Dave. Glad to be here. Be anytime.
Well, we're happy to do it. And thanks again for everything. And we're going to talk again soon, I hope.
Okay, buddy.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.